I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
Lesson 21 is where we're working today. If anybody has your books. I thought I might make a point of thanking everyone in class for your comments and your thoughts. It makes me feel more at ease. And I know a school teacher who once told me that this isn't a college lecture class. It's a Bible study. And so we all learn if we all participate. And I just thought I'd mention that. Because usually I'm kind of nervous, but the more thoughts that go around kind of help me also. This lesson this morning, Brother Thompson in his book here says that of all the lessons in this book, this is by far the most important. That was his thought. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it's definitely one that we need to consider. He says that Christians have been known to accept perverted and unscriptural views concerning trials that we face daily. And he made the point of saying that some people have become so discouraged by trials that they've lost their faith. That's a sad scenario, isn't it? And I believe part of the problem lies with a misunderstanding of trials. Complaining, murmuring, and challenging God is sometimes a deadly result of misinterpreting the results of our trials. You know, I remember, I probably have told this story before, but I remember years ago, Tammy and I were running a big chicken farm, and it was definitely a huge challenge for me. And I recall one night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, the alarms were all going off in the egg laying barn. And because if the heat rises too quickly, then all the chickens die. But I remember walking over to the barn that night, still, I can picture it, almost crying and asking God, what on earth is going on? What am I doing wrong? Why is this happening to me? And I look back on that now, and really that's challenging God, isn't it? It's complaining to God when really you don't even know if God had any part in that. Trials and problems happen to us every day. It's just a reality of life. So we need to be careful, and maybe that was Mr. Thompson's thought of this being such an important lesson. But sometimes we are complainers, and when we complain to God, But as I said, sometimes misinterpretation comes from not understanding really what the meaning of the word is. And as I looked up a few thoughts, trial can be just simply finding out what can be done. A man tries to lift a stone, and on trial he finds out that he's not able. It's a simple trial, isn't it? And it can also be classed as an experiment. The act of examining by experience, repeated trials are necessary. That's another thought. And a trial can also be an experience. Suffering that puts strength, patience of faith to the test. That's simply another form. And The toughest trial, though, can come in the form of a temptation. The afflictions that we have to prove the graces or the virtues of men. And no matter the walk, every station in life is exposed to some sort of trial, isn't it? Doesn't matter where we are. Your different jobs, present different trials to us. But our concern as Christians is, what effect do trials have on us? We even may ask the question, why do I need trials? I'm not living as the world does. And this lesson, I believe, will help us with any misconceptions that we have about trials. And I thought, to begin with, sometimes our cry is simply, why me? I don't know about you all, but that thought has crossed my mind through life. Why me? Why does this happen to me? And I always remember my mom saying that when you do that, just think of others. Think of the trials that they're through.
And I think we focus so much on ourselves that we think it's strange. Well, other people don't have those problems. Well, they may not have those problems, but they have some other problems.
Right.
Nobody is problem-free. I like to meet, Jesus wasn't even problem-free, and he was God. And so, as far as, we shouldn't think it's strange that there are trials. If there aren't trials, then really, there's no room for growth.
Right. Ella?
Once I heard a sermon in Trinidad, and it was entitled, Why Not Me?
Right.
Why Not Me?
Yeah.
Which means you have a big task.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's right. So, well, like Jared and Carla pointed out, it's not only me. All of us endure trials. And we're reminded of some faithful men and women who have endured great trials in life. And we'll look at a few of them. Is that on the screen or just the angle?
We probably need to start using some bullet points.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. Well, we can figure out Abraham.
It's for him.
Well, we turn to Hebrews 11 then, as we look at some of the faithful men, and I added some women in here. The lesson book is only the men, and I thought, what about the ladies? We'll just throw a couple in there to help us all. But Hebrews 11, verses 17 to 19, and maybe we'll start with Jared. You read those, please, Jared.
By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it is said, In Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, for which he also received him in a figurative sense.
Okay. This passage, right off the bat, I didn't have this in my notes, but it just jumped out at me. We know what the test was, don't we? We know Abraham was being tested by God, because we're told that.
Even in the same story, Isaac, right?
Right.
He knew what was going on, but what did he say? God will provide.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. And his trust in his father, too.
And you probably will get to this a little later, but I'd like us to make a note, because what Genesis 22 says in most versions, that Abraham was tempted. And we often come along and think, well, he was tempted to sin. Well, he wasn't doing that. He was tested. And Hebrews makes that quite clear.
Right.
Abraham wasn't tempted to sin. He was tested. It was a test of faith. Would Abraham trust God? And now Genesis 22 doesn't tell us, but Hebrews 11 does, that Abraham believed that God could raise Isaac from the dead. Now, he'd never seen that before, and yet he knew God could do that.
Right, right.
And that was the test.
Right. The only thing I thought for the resurrection was he saw a son born from him and a wife that were both well past the age of producing children, and yet then he realized, well, God did a miracle for that, then God should be able to raise Isaac, shouldn't he? But I thought, what was on trial with Abraham too, I thought maybe, because I have sons, I thought as a father, that would be a great challenge, because your whole life has been devoted to raising and teaching your son, and now you got to take your son's life. Even knowing that through a miracle Isaac was born, even knowing and having the faith that Abraham had, that's a pretty big challenge for a father to do that. And also Moses, down to verses 24 to 26. It's still in Hebrews 11. Maybe I'll go to Kala for that one.
By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward.
Okay, so what trial was Moses faced with? We could ask trials. We see it.
He was tempted with the riches of Egypt. As an Egypt, raised as an Egyptian, even though he was Hebrew.
Very good. A life of a millionaire, and he was choosing to be with his people.
Well, and he was faced with the trial looking the other way. His people were being afflicted. Even though he was raised as an Egyptian, he knew he was an Hebrew. And he could have looked the other way.
Right.
But he didn't.
Right.
He chose rather to suffer that affliction because he didn't view himself as better than his people. And we don't often think of that as a trial, but it was. Moses could have easily said, well, no, Pharaoh's daughter adopted me. I deserve to be here. He didn't do it that way.
Yeah. And that's, for human weakness, I mean, that's a good point. Who wants to take less when we have more? I think of our sports players that make millions every year. Which one of them would gladly give up half of their income, their lifestyle? And Daniel then, I'll go to Gord for that. Daniel 1 and verse 8. Daniel 1 and verse 8.
But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself.
Okay, what trials was Daniel faced with here?
The food that they were provided to eat.
The which God?
The food.
Right.
That they were provided to eat.
Yeah. He had a purpose in his mind, didn't he? And he was presented with another thought, as Gord says, the lifestyle. But he decided, purposed in his heart, this is what I'm going to do.
Remember, they had different dietary laws too.
Right.
Clean and unclean foods. Nebuchadnezzar didn't have those things, and you figure knowing the type of man Nebuchadnezzar was, he would kill you for looking at him cross-eyed. And king puts something in front of you and you don't eat. What are you telling the king? But Daniel wouldn't do that. He said, no, this is my, and the rest of the story goes and talks about what Daniel did, but Daniel said, no, I'm going to follow God, and I'm going to follow his rules even if it upsets the king.
Right. It was a matter of principle to him, wasn't it? But principles in our lives, we have set principles in our thinking, in our desires. Doesn't mean that there won't be a challenge when them principles are challenged. It'll be a trial. I thought of there's another trial that Daniel endured. Most common, we read it in storybooks. We were in Sunday school, the lion's den. There was a great trial by Daniel. Throw me in there, God will protect me. And he chose to do what he believed in. And Esther was one that popped into my thinking. Esther chapter 4. And I'll get Jeff, I'll give that one to you. Nehemiah, Esther chapter 4, verses 13 to 16.
Mordecai told him to answer Esther, but do not think in your heart that you will escape from the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent this time, relief and deliverance will arise for you from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told him to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So, what trial was before Esther here? What?
Save her people or save her life. Like as far as she had she could have very easily lost her life. She didn't know.
Right.
She didn't know if she could have lost her life and her people lost her life, but she was determined that she was at least going to try.
Right.
And if you don't try something, you will never succeed. And the Jews were going to be killed. It was a certainty. Haman had already convinced the king to sign the decree. And so unless she did something, it was going to happen. So she took the same tack as Moses, maybe for a different reason, that I'm not going to be any different than my people. Either I will die and they will die, or I will live and they will live.
Right. That's right. And I thought, too, she may have been thinking, well, then I'll be the first. I'm going to be the first to die if I do this. You could have the thought, well, let's wait and see. Maybe somehow I'll squeak through this, being in favor of the king, but to make that decision that fine, I'll perish.
And also, we have to remember that the culture. She's a woman. Men did not always listen to women.
Right.
And they still don't today a lot of times. But she's a woman. And so it was a double thing for her. And I convinced the king to listen to me instead of Haman.
Right.
That was a task.
Yeah. knowing that that was against the law for her to even speak to the king.
Yeah.
And our next reading, I'll get you to read this one. And this is about Hannah. And that was 1 Samuel 1, 10 and 11.
She quickly discerned, prayed to the Lord, and wept bitterly. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give you maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord for the days of his life, and a little should never come on his head.
Okay. Thinking of a mother, what trial do you see here for Hannah?
Empty womb.
That's one, yeah. That's right, Gord. And what else? What did she have to do after that womb was filled with a son? The son was born.
She made a promise.
The what?
She made a promise.
Right.
She'd raise him as a Nazarite.
Right, and give him up. Give him to the Lord, didn't she? And the reason I thought of that was because I was still thinking of Abraham as a father. And even with his faith, he's realizing that God's asking me to kill my son, the one you blessed me with in old age. And then with Hannah, the emotions of a mother giving birth to that child, and knowing that not too long, I think it was, maybe Jared could help me here, I think normally Levi's service wasn't until you were 25 years old. I thought, maybe I'm wrong.
You started at 25, it wasn't really till you were 30.
Okay.
You had 5 years where, it might have been 20 to 25 and then you started at 25, or it was 25 to 30 and
Right.
you started at 30. But there was always 5 years where you were almost like a priest in training.
Right.
And you'd learn how to do things, and then you'd start.
Right. And the point I was trying to have us see there is that Hannah could have enjoyed Samuel in her home, daily life, as a mother and son, till he was 20 years old. But she gave him up, told God no. Once she was done birthing him, and of course going through the time of period before he was able to leave her side, feeding and this and that, then no, she said take him.
Plus, I don't believe, I have to go to Chronicles to remind myself, I don't believe he was the house bearer. So he would not have had the same, as a Levite, he would have had duties in the tabernacle. Because Gershom, the other two families of Levi had tabernacle duties.
Oh, right, okay.
But they wouldn't be priests. They wouldn't be offering the sacrifices, so it wouldn't be quite the same. But what we also need to remember about Samuel is all the Levites were already devoted to the Lord automatically from birth. Like as far as they, and so they could, if you vow someone to the Lord, you can't redeem them back. He's their firstborn. He's already devoted to the Lord. So you were giving him up, and he was going to be completely devoted to the Lord. That's quite a sacrifice, since she had no children.
Right. That's right. She had none, couldn't have any. Now God's blessed her with one, and she's got to give them up. Did you have your hand up, Carla? No? Oh, okay. So, we'll look at this thought. Trials come through different approaches as designed by God. We go back to Abraham, and I'll come back to you, Sandra, for a reading. And Genesis 12 and verse 1. And Tammy, I'll give you Genesis 22 and verse 3. So Genesis 12 and verse 1. And remember now, we're trying to find out what type of trial this was. So Genesis 12 and verse 1.
Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee.
Okay, and Tammy, 22 and verse 3.
So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood to do the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him.
Okay, so Brother Thompson then wants us to, what type of approach then did God use here as far as this trial, these trials go with Abraham? It's kind of a different.
Is he trying to say God spoke to him?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a direct command
Yeah.
is what he's aiming at. And as I studied and thought of these, I thought maybe he's trying to have us understand. Sometimes we wonder, where did this trial come from? Is this from God? And we can talk about that a little later on, because God doesn't speak to us with direct commands anymore. Okay, so we can't say then, well, this trial, we can't say to God anything about the trial as if He had directly commanded it, because God doesn't deal that way with us. And I think what I saw from this study was we need to be careful when we talk to God through prayer. We're talking about struggles and trials we're going through. We need to be careful what, and if we are accusing God of that, because we don't know a direct command.
And here, the first one for Abraham wasn't really a trial that, like, Abraham had to leave his home, yes, but they were nomads at that time, and so perhaps that was a trial, but it wasn't certainly different than Genesis 22.
Right.
And so sometimes trials that we go through will produce good results in the end, even though it might be tougher at the time.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I thought even with Abraham having to leave Ur, where he was from, I was studying one time, and I forget which book it was, but they had brick homes in that period of time that they've excavated. And all of a sudden I had a bit of a different outlook on him. He would have had to given up a pretty stable type lifestyle to now wander through the desert, on his way to Canaan. I kind of thought it'd be like if you asked me to leave where I'm living in the country to come down here and live in the city. I'd be going, no way. Like, I'd be trying to find some way that I didn't have to do that. And I thought of Abraham, maybe he had to give up a fair bit with him and his dad. It's hard to say.
Verse 1 of chapter 22, it says that, that God did tempt Abraham, and I understand the point that Jeremy is making. But this is the King James Version, and a lot of people use the King James Version. All the other versions, Amplified American, New American Standard, and New International says test. So some people could be so adamant that, oh, it says tempt, so God is tempting me too. So just for argument's sake, some people will say that. But I do understand it means test. I'm just saying for argument's sake.
Right. That's a good point.
To that point, I do guide people to James chapter 1. When someone says they're tempted, let them know and say they're tempted of God. Because God does not tempt man to do evil. God is not tempted, nor does he tempt man to do evil. The test can be from God. Temptation, the word tempt, is a test. Even when it's temptation to do evil, is it a test? Will you sin or not?
Right.
But the temptation to sin comes from the devil. A test of faith, which is not really you, it's will you follow God? Like as far as will you obey God? It is showing you what is your faith. How much faith do you have in me?
Exactly.
You have to take it a step further because when you want to I say, well, it says out there. And so we have to be on the groove to be able to explain.
Yeah.
Like as far as if we get an illness, right? So that could be a test from God. I'm not saying it.
Yeah.
I'm taking your point earlier. It could be, maybe not, but it is a trial at any rate. Do we trust in God when we get an illness? And it doesn't mean we do nothing, but do we trust in God? Do we have our faith in God? Or will we, because we got ill, well, God did this to me, and if God did this to me, therefore, he's not a loving God, and all this stuff. So that's the difference.
Yeah.
It wasn't a test to sin. It was a test.
Right.
Will you follow me?
Yeah. Yeah, I've always, when it comes to trials and tests and thinking of God, I remind myself that I don't know exactly if these challenges are coming from God. Maybe some of them are, maybe not, but what I do know is, though, that he's watching to see how I handle that challenge or test or trial. So I need to not worry so much, because we'll talk about this later, but I need to not worry so much and challenge God. I think of the chicken farm. Why are you allowing this? Well, wait a minute. It's a fact of life. God wasn't allowing it. He's watching to see how I handle it. And when we challenge him, challenge God, saying that this is too much for me, why are you doing this? Then we're in trouble, I think, because we're challenging his superiority.
But a lot of times I'm not sure of the scripture, but it says it's for our glory, for his glory and our growth. It's for our growth and his growth.
Right. And when you say that, then, Father, it's our glory because we've handled it in the right way.
It's for God's glory, but it's for our growth.
Right. Yeah. Our glory to him is how I look at that. And it's because we've done what he has asked, haven't we? We'll just quickly then end with Job, because this would be a good point to end on. Job chapter 1 and verse 12. Job chapter 1 and verse 12. I'll just come up to Jared here for time's sake.
Okay. The Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
Okay, and so God, who's God allowing here then to test Job?
Satan.
Right, Satan. And then Jared chapter So I'll get chapter 2 and verse 6. Chapter 2 and verse 6. Oh. And there was a lot of typos in this lesson, and that were wrong
That's
scriptures.
the same one.
Is it? Yeah, but I was thinking about his friends too.
Oh, that's in the end of chapter 2.
Like we know God allowed Satan to do it, and then the other point I was trying to make was he allowed Job's friends
and his wife.
And his wife. Yeah. So Job was presented with those challenges coming from.
Just before you close, this is an indirect approach by God.
Yes.
Like as far as sometimes God directly tests us.
Yep.
Sometimes He allows it to happen. So this is an indirect test
Right.
by God.
Right. And we face a lot of that.
Yeah.